You all. Oop. Thank you all for waiting. I apologize for the delay. At this time, I would like to call to order the subcommittee of the special elections on integrity. And at this time, we have 3 bills on our agenda. Do we have Representative Cantrell? Would you like to present your bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Before I got elected, I was fascinated with the idea of ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting, because as a private citizen, I really hated the way we do our runoffs here in Georgia. And my first time I got elected, I went to a runoff in the summer. So 9 weeks of my summer was spent campaigning when it could have been spent getting ready to govern. So last fall, I noticed some of my Democrat colleagues online talking about this issue. So I reached out to them and talked to them about what are some things we could do along this lines. And we came up with several options, but the one that we had the most consensus about was the idea of allowing instant runoff voting for military and overseas citizen absentee voters, otherwise known as UACAVA. 5 states currently have instant runoff voting for the military and overseas citizens: Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. And as you know, being on this committee, you know that we currently have a 9-week runoff for federal elections. Georgia has a 4-week runoff for local and statewide elections. One point I want to make is we already have 4-week runoffs for local and statewide election, but we're the only state in the country to have a runoff in a general federal election. We're the only state. So if we were able to, and the reason we have that is because of a ruling by a federal judge several years ago. So if we allowed uniformed overseas citizens, absentee voters, to use instant runoff voting, it means we wouldn't have to worry about the tight turnaround between a runoff and the general election and a runoff. So the major benefit for Georgia would be that we would be able to return to all our runoffs being 4 weeks instead of the onerous 9-week runoff that we currently experience. So this past December, we could have had the runoff on December 1st instead of having our Christmas and New Year's completely inundated with negative campaigning and mail pieces in our mailbox. So that's what the bill does. It's a pretty simple bill. It is a long bill because they had to repeat the language over and over again to make it work. But basically, it would allow all our military and overseas ballots to use a ranked choice voting method.
Thank you, Chairman Cantrell. I should have clarified, too, that we are working from the substitute to House Bill 59, LC 280153S. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. At this time, I would ask the committee if any of you has any questions for the bill's author. Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you're trying to combine the election and the runoff?
Just for military and overseas ballots.
Do you have another question?
How can a runoff election be conducted before the election results, creating the runoff, or even certification?
Yeah, the way it works is that all the overseas ballots would get 2 ballots. They would get a regular ballot, a regular mail-in ballot like they always get. They would get a second ballot for any race that could potentially go to a runoff, meaning it would have 3 or more candidates in the race. They'd fill out both ballots. The runoff ballot would only be opened if those races went to a runoff. And then those ballots would be counted using ranked choice voting methodology at that point.
You may have mentioned this in your presentation. Do other states utilize this method?
Yeah, there's 5 other states. Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina, all high military states, to try to avoid having to have this 9-week runoff.
Okay, thank you. Do any other members of the committee have? Which number are you? Oh. All right, go ahead, Representative Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your answer has spawned another question
Okay.
from the last one. Have you spoken to the elected county officials that about the impact, and what was their response?
Yeah, I have spoken to some. Of course, they have concerns about the shortened time frame, but they're already doing this. We already have a 4-week runoff for all state and local elections already. So basically, it would just be the general federal runoff would be the only one affected by it, and we'd have to adjust accordingly. Yeah, there'd be an adjustment period, no doubt, but this is something we've done for years. We did it for many, many years until the federal judge ruled on the federal election only. We still do it for statewide and local elections. We still do 4-week runoffs.
Representative Alexander?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What happens when a risk limited audit needs to be conducted in the period between an election and a runoff?
Yeah, that's
'Cause
something.
I didn't see that covered in here.
That's something that would have to be worked out by the elections boards. We've been doing this for many, many, many years, so I'm not aware that it's ever been a problem. So definitely would have to be addressed, I guess, but it's not, to my knowledge, that's not been an issue.
Representative Rick Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have answered my question then. The states that do it is Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and who?
South Carolina.
South Carolina. Do we have any election officials here? Did any come for this hearing? I didn't know if any county people came or not to testify. That's all, thank you.
Number 11. Madam Pro Tem? Is it working? I think it's not working. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Try it
now it's
again.
on.
Okay.
My understanding is we're the only state with a long runoff, 9-week runoff. Is that correct?
We are the only state in the country with a 9-week runoff in a general federal election.
Right.
And then I was in communication with the Secretary of State's office early today to make sure I had all this right.
Yeah.
But like in my case, my election was a 9-week runoff because they already assume that there's going to be some federal
Right.
runoffs in a primary, and that's why. Because I wondered why did I have to? Because it was a local election, but
Right.
it still applied because they like to lump them all into one.
And I believe, Representative, that the primary reason we are the only state is because 48 other states, their elections are by plurality.
Correct.
And Louisiana is not plurality, but they have like a jungle.
The jungle primary,
for
yeah.
everything. But so we're the only state that does it our way. More populous states figure out how to count the ballots for people to vote of all types of states all over the country in a 4-week time period. Is that right?
That's correct. And a lot of them are 3 weeks. I did a bunch of research, and most states have their runoffs in 3 weeks.
All right. Representative Douglas, is that 11? Oh, no, that was 13.
13.
Okay.
Just a simple question. I was thinking about when you were answering those questions, the impact on new voters during this time period, and what about our young people that's turning 18 during this transition that you're talking about? Will they be able to vote in the election coming up with them turning 18 during this transition?
Specifically when? The deadline for registration would be the same. So I don't know when so I think it's 30 days currently
Right.
for turning 18 and being able to vote. So it would be the same.
Will be the same. Okay.
All right, any other questions from the committee? We have someone from the ACLU here signed up to speak. Is that Chris Bruce?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you, and members of the committee. My name is Christopher Bruce. I am the political director of the ACLU of Georgia, an organization that is dedicated to protecting the civil liberties of all Georgians, especially your right to vote. So the original version of HB 59 was a bipartisan effort to ensure that Georgians in the military and overseas could more easily vote in the runoff elections through the use of ranked choice ballots. So ranked choice voting is a far less resource-intensive runoff type of situation. The ACLU of Georgia actually supported the original version of HB 59 and continues to support this type of voting. But however, we do not support the unreasonable provisions that have been put in HB 59, such as the 28 days after an election. Forcing all runoffs to occur just 28 days after an election will burden already overlooked local election officials, as we have talked about before, and the timeline will create a direct conflict between administering the runoff election and activities that involve finalizing the previous election's results, including tabulating vote totals, administering recounts, conducting risk-limiting audits, and certifying the election. Election staff would be considerably delayed in mailing absentee ballots or conducting early voting, as neither of these options can begin until the election is certified, which happens after 10 days on the county level and 17 days on the state level. For example, after the 2020 general election, the Secretary of State postponed the December 1st Public Service Commission runoff because county election staff widely expressed that they did not have enough time to administer a statewide runoff election so quickly, especially following 2 recounts and a risk-limiting audit. This body should seek to prevent that kind of election administrating challenge instead of making it worse or a burden on local county board of elections. Additionally, the runoff conflicts with a legal requirement for early vote. Currently, early voting must start the 4th Monday prior to the election day for federal runoffs. If HB 59 had been in effect for the general election on November 3rd, every Georgia county would have been required to begin early voting for the runoff election by November 9th, 6 days after the general election. Election officials, again, would not have been able to finalize the early vote locations, find adequate staffing, and allocate equipment in less than a week after a primary general election, before the election that created the runoff is even certified, and before ballots for the runoff are even designed. Logistically, this is impossible. So the ACLU of Georgia is not opposed to the consolidation of runoffs if the runoff date is reasonable. In fact, we urge this committee to support and adopt a provision to consolidate runoff elections to 72 days after the general election, which is the current federal runoff date. 72 days provides ample time for the primary or general election to be certified, absentee ballots to be properly mailed out, early voting to be conducted, and voter registration to be processed, ensuring all Georgians are able to vote. So we urge this body to reject the bill as currently drafted. Thank you, and I yield for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Do any members of the committee have questions for Mr. Bruce? All right, I see none. Thank you.
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you, Mr. Bruce. Do any committee members wish to speak to the bill? Okay.
I live in a community that perhaps, and work in a community that perhaps has the most military folks who are currently serving outside of the country and do that frequently, being the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart. Many of those folks are already familiar with this system, having once voted in South Carolina or Mississippi or one of these other places that currently has it. So, and every comment I've ever heard about it has been very positive.
Thank you. Representative Deloach. Okay. Representative Williams?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Representative, if you'll come up to the podium, please. These other states, what is the amount of time between their elections and their runoffs? Arkansas, Alabama, are they varied or are all of them about
I
the
can't
same?
speak to every single one of them, but the ones I looked at today were 3 weeks or 4 weeks. But I can't, honestly, I can't say I know for every single one of those states.
Okay. But most of them are 4 weeks in between?
3 weeks, actually.
3 weeks?
Yeah, 3 weeks is more common than 4. I'll say too, just to speak to what he said. The entire purpose of this bill, including the bipartisanship of this bill, was to get to a 4-week runoff. If there's no purpose in having ranked choice voting for military and overseas, if we stick with a 9-week runoff, there's just no point. We say they still have plenty of time to send in an absentee ballot like they currently do. And so that was the understanding on this bill from and this was back in October. This was prior to the most recent election and the 9-week runoff that we experienced. We already do 4-week runoffs, statewide and local. Say that again. So we've been doing that for years and years and years and years. I think it's a mistake to try to act like what we just went through is normal and going to be what we experience every time. And we shouldn't base policy on that. I'm here to represent my constituents, and my constituents hate the 9-week runoff. They think it's way, way, way too long, and they're tired of it. And I think it hurts our voter engagement because people are tired and they have voter fatigue. I think 4 weeks will have a better participation from the general. Because even as good as the participation was this last time, we still had over 1 million less people vote. So, I think we create a false majority when you have to wait 9 weeks to vote again.
Madam Pro Tem?
At the proper time, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, it's
Okay.
the time.
I'd like to move due pass for the substitute to House Bill 59.
All right, do I have a second? Second. All right. All right, at this time, all in favor of passing the substitute to House Bill 59, LC 280153S, signify by saying aye. Those opposed, like sign. All right, the bill passes, so we will report this to the full committee with a favorable consideration. Thank you so much, Chairman Cantrell. Thank you. And at this time, I would like to call up Chairman Lumsden. I apologize, Chairman. I did not see you sitting there earlier.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the House. I bring to you House Bill 136. This LC number 470705. This is a bill that applies to counties in Georgia which do not have a board of elections and utilize a probate judge as the elections superintendent. Had a situation in one of my counties where our probate judge suffered from COVID, was incapacitated for many weeks before he passed, and it was right during the critical time of the election. It was discovered by our county attorneys as we were looking into the way to go about replacing or dealing with the situation of incapacitation that Georgia law did not specifically address incapacitation. It addressed the situation where the probate judge would resign or where he died, but it did not address incapacitation. So what you have in House Bill 136 is language that simply seeks to give direction for the 30 some odd counties in the state who utilize the probate judge as their chief elections officer or election superintendent. And that is the bill, and be glad to answer any questions.
All right, and I see Representative Williams has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, does any of those counties, do their probate judges have a chief number 2 in command that it would automatically roll to? Or is this in code that the probate judge who serves as a superintendent is the only one that can do it?
Normally, that would be, the latter would normally be the case. And as I said, in this particular situation, with the incapacitation, I'm not exactly certain how they went about doing this, but it was at a critical phase during the election process when he was incapacitated. And of course, you can't certify if you don't have the proper election superintendent in place.
At the proper time, I'd like to make a motion to pass.
All right, it's the proper time.
Motion to pass.
All right, thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign? No. All right, so this will be reported to the full committee with a favorable recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more bill on the agenda, and that is from Representative Gaines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 64. What this legislation does is last year in Athens, Clark County, we had a county commissioner who was running for re-election, tragically passed away just 2 days before the election. He still received the requisite votes to be elected. However, under Georgia law in nonpartisan races, the law is a little bit vague, and the county attorney determined that even though the individual who came in second received less votes, that individual would be is now on the county commission, which I think even our county commission, and I think everybody would agree that that's not how it should be. So what this bill does is it requires a special election in the case that the individual who passes away receives the requisite votes to be elected. And so that's basically what the bill does.
All right, thank you, Representative. Are there any questions from members of the committee? All right. All right, do I have a second? All right, all those in favor, vote aye, or say aye. Those opposed, like sign. All right, so the bill passes with a favorable recommendation. Thank you. And with that, this meeting will be adjourned.